Hey there everybody, this is Havoc with a new type of dedicated video that I'm testing out called a critique to the devs. This video will be a form of a letter to the editor where I point out areas of concern as a player on whatever game I am playing, and it's directly intended for the developers. There are two goals for these videos: a direct critique video to allow developers to not have to sift through a myriad of information, and it allows the community, you all watching, a chance to get an early look into anything of concern that I have and get your feedback on it. Again, ultimately for the developers to see. There is a big stipulation with this video type. I will heavily moderate comments in an effort to promote comments with constructive criticism. For a third time, this is primarily for the developers. A developer can't work with a "this is a crap mechanic" comment. Even if you approve of a certain thing, explain why you agree, as both positive and negative criticism in detail can create a better game. With that out of the way, let's get into our first critique to the devs video with Total War Saga Troy. The campaign. There's a lot riding on this campaign, so it's no surprise that a lot of time and energy was spent working on it, as confirmed in our preview event interview. To push that a bit further, the biggest experiment or risk was implementing the multi-resource economy. There's nothing quite like it in the Total War franchise, and it does indeed shake up the system, allowing you to do more per turn in your campaigns and opens up opportunities that we've just not yet seen, and it is a great first draft, as it were. But it needs more power behind it. Even with 5 different resources, it is not that their use is limited, but there's not anything you can do with them outside of spending them. In a gold-only system, there just wasn't much to do but spend and hoard it. With Troy, you have an opportunity to make resources have a much bigger impact. For instance, too many units have food only for recruitment and upkeep. Make archers, which are currently food only, require wood and food for recruitment and upkeep. Slingers should be food and stone for both. You have renowned slingers needing bronze and food, use that system more. It doesn't have to be much, but enough to where there is more consistency with your recruitment and upkeep mechanics across the board. Buildings are another area where you can bring in some depth. I thoroughly enjoyed having all buildings require some sort of upkeep in the Ancient Empires mod for Total War Attila. The same system can be used in Troy very easily. Temples can consume food, since food is required anyways for prayers or hecatombs. It would represent the daily sacrifices used by the priests and priestesses. Ports should use a bit of wood for upkeep, creating a trade-off mechanic: more food as you level up, with the expense of more wood for making more ships. Even some more stone or bronze thrown into higher level buildings would be a nice touch to counter decay. It may seem a bit superfluous, but if you're going to push a multi-resource economy, there needs to be more economy in it to really sell the idea. Growing too quickly is another campaign woe, and it affects several areas. If you play your cards right, you could be looking at around 200 plus growth in your settlements per turn, giving the player a way to very easily max out an entire province in little time, assuming they have the resources to. I'm all for being able to grow steadily, but having a population surplus every 2 turns seems a bit excessive, even when playing on the normal difficulty we had for this campaign. Favor follows this same route. It is very feasible to max out your favor to a god or goddess in less than 20 turns using a combination of hecatombs, temples, and priestesses. Maxing out Athena, who is already OP as we've discussed in our feedback, gives you plus 40% to morale, melee attack, and melee defense for spears, minus 20% fatigue to units when defending, plus 30 morale to all units in a hero's aura, and all heroes are unbreakable. They just can't rout. I could have an army of spears by turn 20 that are 1.5 times stronger, tired 20% slower, and will basically never rout even in the worst of scenarios, fighting beside a hero that will certainly never rout. That's not okay, and it is very easily exploitable. This issue has already been brought to the attention of the developers, just so the community knows, and hopefully something can be done to curb the quick rise of the god's favor, as I see it being heavily used by people like Legend of Total War or even the Spiffing Brit. Trade and diplomacy work hand in hand with Total War Saga Troy, and my first critique in this area is mainly UI based. The system follows 3 kingdoms in terms of bartering, so you see exactly what the odds are of the other side accepting. Yet especially when it comes to empire-wide effects that diplomacy can have, the last thing you want to do is accidentally agree to something because you clicked the wrong button. All interactions in diplomacy are buttons at the bottom of the UI bar. This really needs to be in text form, as in pretty much every single other Total War game. Yes, the buttons are relatively straightforward, and yes, you can hover over them every time until you memorize them, but having a large block of actual text that initiates the diplomatic negotiations eliminates the user error I foresee happening on release. When it comes to trade, the AI is a bit wonky, and this is another area that has already been brought to the developers' attention. The AI favors its own resources quite a bit, and won't part with much of their own unless you pretty much have gold in exchange. This is fairly frustrating because more often than not, I need food, and seeing the AI in some exchanges make me modify the food amount by individual pieces of grain is indeed very frustrating, especially when they're running around with multiple stacks of soldiers and I'm just trying to feed my one army. Physical agents were a concern of mine when I first heard about them in the early dev blogs, and there was an immediate fear of seeing agent spamming come back in force. Well, those fears were indeed confirmed. Do not get me wrong, I really do prefer physical agents on a campaign map instead of slapping them in a city like we do in 3 Kingdoms. Yet in one of my campaigns towards the end of the 40 turns, my priestess could not move for 5+ turns because 4 different agents tag teamed her at the end of every turn. Unfortunately for this one, I don't have a real solution that I could say would truly work. Agent spam has been an issue for the franchise pretty much since its conception, but if there was any way to maybe code a limit for the AI or even make costs astronomically more for them when recruiting agents, it might be one small step towards perfecting them. The last thing I'll drop for the campaign is supply lines. This is a very sore spot for a vast majority of the community, and for this build, it was devastating at 30% increase in food upkeep just for your second army. Having talked at length about the supply line mechanic with the developers, I fully understand that both the player and the AI would run rampant with food if it was just pulled, but sweet lordy, I cannot emphasize enough that Creative Assembly as a whole needs to figure out a working solution to supply lines, potentially going down a similar route as the SFO Grimhammer team and increasing upkeep a smidge with every army, but drastically increasing recruitment costs. This would further use the multi-resource economy as discussed before, while also making the player think harder about battles they want to engage in, since replacing entire units would cost a lot later into the game that they play. Battles. There is a very decent bit I could go on about battles, but again, I'm sticking to things that I know the team could solve with relative ease that focuses on a more functional mechanic-based idea, and there's 4 big ones here. Starting with unit collision. If you've watched any gameplay of the battles in this build, you will notice that sometimes units just go straight through other units like they just weren't there. There is a very technical response that we as a group received, as they actually figured out the bug during our playthrough. This lack of unit collision will not be seen, fingers crossed, in the final build, but it was very annoying to deal with during our time with the game. And it is a bit concerning to see such a major bug not be seen with just over a month to go before release, but I am truly glad that it was figured out and is being worked on. Next up is battle pacing. One of my biggest complaints with the very first build we received was battle pacing. A 40 unit battle lasting less than 4 minutes on average is a very unappealing aspect to a great portion of the Total War community. When I played the battles in this build of Troy, I noticed that the pacing had been reworked a tad, where larger battles are more on pace with Warhammer battles, lasting on average around 10 minutes and allowing me to use real Total War tactics, not just throw everything at everyone and roll with it. This is definitely an improvement to the last time we all played, yet I would really prefer to see it slowed down just a bit more to set the pace nice and steady and peel more towards the historic side of the Total War franchise. Heroes. It's an area that needs addressed, especially for the early game. In talking with several of the other partners, all of us had the same experience. The battle with units ended minutes before the battle between heroes did, with the units unable to really put any sort of dent into the enemy hero or vice versa. This is a problem for the early game, no doubt about it. It's not even that the hero gets hundreds of kills. It's just that even in the early game, they are so tanky that they end up routing all of my units if I try to fight with them. There's a discussion on the reasoning behind this, but I truly feel that it would be more balanced to have a slightly weaker hero in the early game than use their level ups to increase their own stats when you're getting into the mid to late game, and start seeing more heavily armed units that can truly take the heroes on themselves without much worry. And lastly on my critique of battles is morale and routing. The current standard for routing units follows the Skaven model. I believe I've seen units come back around 5 or 6 times after routing if they're not pursued by an enemy unit. While this does extend the battle time, it's an artificial way to do so at best. Morale needs some work done to address this. There may even be a way to tie unit morale to overall unit health, bringing in again SFO Grimhammer into the discussion. That way, more complete units will hold their ground in terms of morale, while units that have been wrecked and lost a lot of models will tend towards routing more often and for longer. All of the critiques in this video are my big issues I have with the build presented to us. They are also, in my opinion, all things that can be addressed by the team and fixed at some point. I am not saying in any way that my critiques be the problems to address or prioritize, but they are issues that I and several other content creators have brought up. And with so many different play styles between all of us, if we all see certain things in each campaign, it's definitely a clue to help prioritize. To the developers, I hope this helps you get a clear picture with some solid feedback. To the community watching this, I hope this helps you understand some of my concerns and gives you enough context to provide your own feedback. Again, I will be heavily moderating comments in this series, so please be constructive in both positive and negative comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. Be on the lookout for more videos on my time with Total War Saga Troy. Subscribe if you enjoyed the content. This is Havoc, and I'll see you in the next video.